Hey guys, this is Kevin Kim with Precision Powerlifting Systems, joined as always by the one and only Jay Birdie, who may or may not have been concussed by walking into the tree that is literally standing right in front of us. How you feeling, Jess? You all right?
Yeah.
Yeah? You woozy?
I kind of feel like shit.
All right.
Back in our original spot.
We are back in our original spot, but on the other side because there were people in our original spot, right?
Yep.
But it's shaded, it's windy, but we got a mic,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
So the thing that I want to talk about today is actually inspired by Jay Birdie's lack of effort in training. No, but I want to talk about box squats because over time I've actually changed the way that I use the box squats. And I kind of want to discuss the importance of doing them a given way in order to get better. And the thing is like the technique of them actually it's pretty tough to learn, and that's a reason why, so Jess, even this last week, even though I'm like shitting on her a little bit, it was better than it was previously, but we've been trying for weeks to actually get the technique of it down. But anyways, I digress.
What does that mean when people say that?
I'm gonna move backwards.
Okay.
So when I first got into powerlifting, as I like to let everybody know, I was coached by Shaco for a 3-year period of time. And he didn't do box squats, and literally this was the translation from him, West Side style. So he did them a different way. So the box that he used was it was there as a guide for depth if somebody wasn't hitting depth consistently. So it wasn't like a box squat where, if you've seen a West Side training video where they're wide, sitting back, it was very different. It was just there as a depth gauge. So in the beginning, that's just what I used it for. So if a lifter was having a hard time hitting depth, the box was there for it. The problem with that is because the box is there, it slows you down before you touch the box. So it does even change the mechanics a little bit. So it's something that you do need to be aware of even in those cases, right? And that's the argument. So at the time that I was getting into powerlifting, box squatting for raw lifters, it had this movement behind it that it wasn't for raw lifting. And I think one of the articles, and this may have been a Juggernaut thing, was saying that the technique of a box squat is so different from a competition squat that it's not going to have any carryover. And this gets back into my conversation about what we want out of specificity. So one, I care about transference, not about how specific a movement is. So for me, specificity is something done within the rules of the sport for a heavy single. That's literally our sport. Now, I think the argument turned into the movement became specific. So, for sake of argument, this is a rhetorical question, but what's going to be more specific to the sport? A set of 10 competition squats, right? Done with the bar on your back where you lift at a competition, your, SBD, mood colored knee sleeves, your, Alico combo rack. So if you're doing sets of 10, or if you're doing a box squat for a heavy single, which is more specific to the sport. And that box squat, for sake of argument, let's put the feet out really wide, sitting way back. To me, I would still argue that box squat, if it's done to depth and all of that stuff, is going to be more specific to the sport of powerlifting than the set of 10 done with competition squats. Not that higher rep sets don't have a place. And there are programs that use a lot more submaximal volume that are largely successful. So that's just where my viewpoints come to in terms of specificity. So when I want transference, when we get out wider, it hits the hips and the hamstrings a lot more. The box allows you to sit back further, allowing you to really target the hips and hamstrings even more. It allows you to squat deeper than you'd be able to squat in a freestanding squat if you're actually sitting on the box. It ensures that you're hitting depth every single time. There's a lot of benefits to it, even in terms of transference to your competition lift, even if it looks vastly different. Now, with that said, because of those differences, you do need to keep in mind that, yes, the raw squat's not going to be that wide. You're going to have more forward knee travel in a competition squat. So you can't negate those other aspects of the lift within the training. This is why an overall viewpoint, an overall vision of the program becomes important. You need to understand the angles that you're really targeting to try to improve, and you want to maintain those other angles so that you don't see decreases in performance. So if you're doing box squats, and Jess can attest to this because she had front squats in her program, so something with a lot of forward knee travel, right? So we have box squats with no forward knee travel, and then we have front squats with lots of forward knee travel. So those two exercises go nicely together in a program. Now, when I first, like I said, so when I first started using box squats, it was basically just a depth gauge. And I was very reluctant to change and to use a more West Side style box squat. One, because I wasn't really sure how to do it. I don't think I had ever been taught. And I just had maybe this belief that they didn't carry over to raw lifting. I would have made that argument 5 years ago or whatever it was at this point. So then over time, I start learning more, and then I'm like, okay, I want people to sit back more because I actually do want to change the angle. So when we do box squats now, I care about a vertical shin. So you might hear Louis Simmons talk about getting the knees behind the ankles, so it's more of a leg curl off of the box. I don't care about having a negative shin angle. I care about having a vertical shin angle. So if we're going to have some forward knee travel at the bottom of a competition squat, I want it to be back a little bit so that we can target some, what I would call for that lifter, and why we're doing that variation, some weaker areas. You know, the lower back, the hips, and the hamstrings. So I want a vertical shin. I don't want it to be positive. I don't care if it's negative. And I think when you get it to be negative, that's where you get more of a change of the actual movement itself. What I do want is I want that vertical shin at this point. I do want them to sit on the box and relax their hips. So before we got to that point, what we were using a lot of is basically, I liked pause squats a lot. I use them a lot in programs, but the problem with pause squats is lifters tend to cut them very high. One, because they're slowing down, so you do get this like perception that you're deeper than what you are. It ends up being right at parallel or a little above. And then on top of that, they tend to shortchange the pause a little bit, right? If I say a 2 or 3 second pause, it might be 1 second if I'm lucky. And it's to get more weight on the bar, and they're doing these things to get more weight. So even a pause squat changes the mechanics of the squat quite a bit, and I think this is the argument for people who do a lot of competition lifts and not much variation, is just the movement changes so much that we're just going to leave the competition lift in there and just alter loads and intensities. So then I was like, well, I remember Chico using a box to gauge depth in the beginning. So it was a squat 2 box is what you would call it. So I was like, oh, I can use the box as a depth gauge for pauses. So we started doing that. People were still shortchanging the pausing a little bit. And it's that nice external cue to sit back a little bit more. And we did see some increases in the technical, the increases of what I wanted to see out of that variation. The problem is like shortchanging the pause. And then I started to just read a little bit more and be reintroduced with stuff that I knew about in the past, but I didn't really know how to practically apply. So if we want to improve explosive strength and absolute strength, there's 2 best ways to do it. You know, you have static to dynamic, and then you have relaxed to dynamic. So a pause squat is static to dynamic, right? Everything's static, held in a position, then you explode out of it after a given period of time. Relaxed to dynamic is literally what it sounds like. So I think a good example to be able to see this is, I'm just going to use a fighting example because it's what makes most sense to me. So you'll see, like, if people are fighting, they tend to be very relaxed and loose, right? Like tension and being tense all of the time removes a lot of that elastic explosive strength. So being relaxed allows them to really explode into combinations and stuff that they're doing within their sport. When we sit on the box and we relax the hips, it's not completely relaxed to dynamic because some muscles, so like the lower back, the abs, like they're in a static position. So they're staying tight the whole time. But when we relax the hips, we're getting that relaxed to dynamic. So it's going to build that explosive strength out of the bottom of a squat. So for me, it was adding in an extra element. So we had that static to dynamic component with the pause squat, but going to a box allowed me to add in that relaxed to dynamic component that's just going to build even a little bit more explosive strength. And we've seen this. And where I think we've seen the biggest increase, like, don't get me wrong, I think we've always been pretty good at at improving our squats, and I think part of that is like the Russians and the Ukrainians were always like well known for their ability to squat. And I think Shaco teaching me the technique of the squat and what's necessary to get better at the squat, I do think that plays a major role in our abilities as a group to have pretty high squat numbers. You know, the amount of girls that we've had squat over 350 pounds is actually pretty cool.
Who's we?
PPS.
Okay.
So where I think the biggest improvement actually came from with the box squats was the deadlifts. I think, you know, I really haven't changed much of what we do with the deadlift over time except adding box squats. And even for me, I had noticed that even with Shaco, when I had the squat to box in there, even though it's not a West Side style box squat, you know, it does still cue you to sit back more because you don't want to miss the freaking box, you know? So when I had that in my program, my deadlift had the best success, that it had the biggest jump that it had ever had working with him. And it's just like an interesting correlation. It doesn't mean, you know, 1 + 1 = 2 in that scenario, but what I've noticed is like our deadlifts as a group have gone up exponentially since we added in box squats, and that's kind of cool to see. And I think what they've done too at the same time is they really help at times where I've had people take a step back from deadlifts and we just did a lot of box squatting, their deadlift numbers stayed or even got better under those scenarios too. So I think there's a lot of, and that's kind of what a deadlift is, right? You're getting set, and you know the bar is resting on the floor and you're in a relaxed position and you're quickly getting tight and trying to pop up like that. Building that explosive strength off of the box like that, I think just has a lot of carryover to that movement. So I think it's something that's missed about the benefits of doing a box squat that's more West Side style than not doing it that way. We do a lot of pin squats, and I do think with the letting the weight settle on the pins and coming up, it's very similar to a deadlift too. So of course that could correlate to the improvements in the deadlift as well. So the thing that I like about the box squats, using the box and doing a West Side style, is you can go wider than you typically would with your competition squat, and that allows you to attack angles that you typically can't attack in other variations. So it just puts more angles on the table to hit weaknesses. The depth, like I was saying before, and like we can use different size boxes. So I even did a whole wave of 10-inch box squats, and I did this in oversized briefs. So for me, one of the biggest weaknesses I have in the gear is I tend to slow down when I start to hit the hole. And in the equipment, there's this like, I don't know of a better way to explain it, but this pressure bubble. Like you hit this certain point and the pressure of the suit kind of increases almost like, feels like exponentially. And you need to push into that pressure to be able to hit depth, maintain technique, and not let like it pull you forward, round your back, do those types of things. So I was really struggling with that, and I figured one way to really fight for it would be to use a lower box. So I went to a 10-inch box, and the first few times it was really hard to like get onto that box, but after 3 weeks I was able to get there pretty quick. And it really helped my technique in the equipment. So I do think there's like benefits to using different heights of boxes. And I couldn't squat to that depth without that box being there. So it just put that on the table. It's like a deficit deadlift, like how you would use it in the same way to fix start position. I was kind of using it to fix the bottom position of my squat. And even just, you know, if you adjust box height even by an inch, you're going to see a drastic difference in the amount of weight you're capable of using on that lift. So it just brings a lot more variation on the table. Jess should look behind her because there's wildlife. It literally there was a rabbit underneath Jess's chair.
You love bunnies.
And I knew Jess would love me bringing it up.
I could feel it coming up behind me.
So I like how it gives us those opportunities to train those different angles. And sitting on the box becomes really important, and relaxing the hips for that relaxed to dynamic component that you get. It builds that explosive strength. It builds that maximal strength a lot more. And I know people will argue that like, oh, because of the rocking on the box, it's dangerous. That rock's not done on purpose. Like there's going to be a little bit of movement.
Why?
I think because of the movement of the lower back.
Also, the box could like.
No, dangerous to like your actual back, right? So if I'm rocking back and rocking forward, I think the argument is that you're just putting a lot of sheer force on the lower back. But if you're staying tight, you're pushing out on your belts, right? Like really bearing down, keeping everything tight, like there's not going to be a lot of rocking. You're going to see some movement because the hips are relaxing, but it shouldn't look like you're in a rocking chair. So you're not rocking off of the box. And as your hips are relaxing, the cue that I give the lifters is to arch their upper back, push their collarbone into the bar. So if my hips are relaxing on the box, I start already picking the bar up with my upper back, and then you spread your feet fast to get up off of that box. So there's your relaxed to dynamic component. But it also teaches you how to lift with your chest first. So, you're gonna come down, and when you start really pushing into the bar with your torso, and then you're spreading off of that box, it actually helps fix some of those technical inefficiencies. Probably the most common technical inefficiency you see in the squat, which is that chest falling forward out of the hole, because people aren't pushing back against the bar before they push with their feet. Because gravity is always on and that bar's sitting on your back. So, and one of the reasons that it helps that technical inefficiency is the box actually helps break up that eccentric component and the concentric component, right? You get that moment to just kind of really think about your positions and what you're supposed to do. And then the more efficient you get with it, the faster that those things can start to happen and the more ingrained it gets in the lifter. So even though it's different, it does bring in a technical efficiency component if it's done well. I think in a lot of cases it's just not done well. Like people just sit on the box, they're not tight, they're rocking back and forth. So I do think there's a skill to actually learning how to box squat correctly that needs to be taken into consideration here. And when it's done correctly, I think it has a lot of positive benefits to not only the squat, but also the deadlift. So we do a ton of box squatting. I find a lot of benefits to it, and I find a lot of benefits. The funny thing is, and like this is just like human nature in general, like you're always going to be that angsty teenager at some point who wants to rebel against what your parents say, right? So you're going to buy your heavy metal CDs and wear your t-shirts that they don't like and stuff like that. I think for me, when I get into powerlifting, I didn't want, like, my teenage angst was more, I would talk poorly about like the West Side way of doing things for raw lifting, and that included box squats. But eventually, like as you get older, you kind of realize that like your parents had some innate wisdom that you were unaware of, and you kind of come around to being more like them the older you get. And I think that's just kind of what's happened is like, I've realized that the people who've been doing this for 40 or more years have figured out a thing or two. And, I did have to learn that on my own to like truly understand it. And I think going through the process of learning it and allowing me to understand it gave me more knowledge and how to better apply it. But there is that like, part of me that's like, oh, if I just did what they said in the beginning, maybe it all would have been fine and stuff. But I wouldn't have learned the same way, and I wouldn't have been able to apply it the same way and understand it the same way. So I do think that like those angsty teenage years are important even as a coach in your career. You're gonna say something, Jess. What do you got?
No. I agree. It's very true. I learn stuff. It's funny as like a strength and conditioning.
Just
coach.
come closer to the mic, just in case.
No, I don't want to be on screen. As a strength and conditioning coach, I feel like we were kind of taught some of the West Side stuff, or just like from old school people. But like us being like skinny nerds, we're like, oh, they don't know what they're talking about. Their backs hurt all the time or whatever. And it's just funny that it comes full circle. And now you're like, wait, they're still lifting, like, for X amount of time years later. So yeah. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, and like you get to lean on I'm educated. I've done all these things, and they're just a bunch of fat, gross, tattooed powerlifters. And that's also the problem too, is they just look like a bunch of old dudes that just wanna in their fat. Yeah, they just like look like a bunch of old dudes that want to lift, and they don't give a shit about like how they feel. When it's just funny like how things come full circle, and you want to deny for some reason that they don't know what they're talking about, and then as the years go on, you're like, oh yeah, they do.
I think, like for me anyway, speaking from my experiences, I think I always viewed West Side as this like template of doing things, and now I understand that it's more of a thought process where he just gives his wealth of experience and knowledge It's a bug flies in my face. His experience of wealth and knowledge and that information to the lifters, and it's on them to use that information to guide their own programs. So it's a thought process, and if you don't understand that it's the thought process and not a program, because I think early, and let me know if you were different, but early in my coaching career, I viewed the program as kind of my expertise in coaching. Like what I wrote on paper was all my knowledge and all my experience, where now I understand that it's more of like my experiences and my wealth of knowledge and my ability to take general principles and just kind of like fit them into the given needs of a certain situation. But before it was like I need to write the perfect program, and I tried to write the perfect program by collecting so much data and focusing on the program and making the program better, and I never really thought about the thought process or the coaching process.
Yeah.
I'm waving Jess over so that she can come in.
Can you make this your cover photo?
No, I don't want you in there.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. That's also exactly what younger coaches, and because I'm so seasoned and experienced,
Jess is a beginner coach.
what they fall into, and that's because we don't have practical application yet, right? I mean, we just have what we learned in school, our internship, which is kind of almost a cookie cutter experience where they say like, okay, do this, this, and this. We're not like, we can't really think for ourselves in those moments. So it's almost when, it's years later, years after school, is when you kind of have to let go and realize you don't necessarily know everything that you thought you did. At least that's what I've had to do. Year after year, I feel like I learn something new. And I definitely always, when I first met you especially, I wanted to fight you on a lot of things.
You were a pain in the ass.
But, yeah.
I mean, you're still a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
But I think part of it too is, right, like school teaches you how to write a program. It doesn't teach you how to coach, right? Like that's a skill you learn from just being in the trenches and actually doing it, right? Like I didn't learn how to coach in school. I learned how to put sets and reps together on a piece of paper. Like, and this even includes grad school. Grad school, we had like, you learn how to have discussions and you realize that like science basically proves whatever you want it to prove, and like it is what it is, and you just kind of, it taught me skills to navigate the coaching world. It didn't really teach me how to coach though. It always came down to like sets and reps and numbers on a sheet of paper, and that's just something that I learned over time, and it's something that I learned from just always talking to people who have just a wealth of experience that's greater than my own. Like there's nobody in my circle that has the same amount of experience than me. Like everybody has at least double the amount of experience that I have in my circle of people I trust. And that's where I like, Jess is literally taking a selfie on the park bench right now. But that's just like, for me, like something that hopefully continues to get better over time is just my ability to apply certain things and just have a greater ability at the art of coaching, I guess. But that's probably a topic for another day. That's all I got. Any other questions or any other thoughts? Jess is stumped. For once, Jess actually stopped talking. It's amazing. All right, you can follow me on Instagram. It's KWCan. Our team, Precision Powerlifting Systems. You can follow Jay Birdie. It's at KWCANN. It's at Jay Birdie, BURDIE.
Is that it?
That's it. And the freaking